Welcome to the Real News Network, and reality asserts itself. I'm Paul Jay. If you watch the Real News with any regularity, you'll know we haven't been quite as obsessed with Russia's supposed intervention in the American elections. According to the leadership, or most of it, of the Democratic Party, it was Russian interference by leaking emails, Hillary Clinton emails and others, Podesta, to WikiLeaks, and that exposed something that shouldn't have been exposed and may have swung the election. At the Real News, we've more or less been saying we have no idea whether Russia did all of these things or not. Nothing's been made public that persuades us that the jury is back on that issue. But if they did get involved, the worst of what they did is, in our mind, expose something far worse, which was the attempts by the DNC to sabotage the Bernie Sanders campaign, which seems to me is a far more significant threat to American democracy. All that being said, the argument being given by the Democratic Party, or much of it, is that it was the Russians that swung the election to Trump. Well, is that? Well, let's discuss that with our guests. So this is the beginning of a Reality Asserts Itself series. We usually start with biographical information, but because all this is kind of newsy, we're going to start with a discussion of Russia-gate. And I'm joined very much happily on my part by Thomas Frank. Thomas is a political analyst, historian, journalist, and columnist for The Guardian. He formerly wrote for Harper's Magazine, Salon, and The Wall Street Journal, and founded The Baffler. Thomas has written several books, including What's the Matter with Kansas, and most recently, Listen Liberal. And Thomas told me off camera that there should have been an exclamation mark in the title, and we were both joking, even if there were all kinds of exclamation marks. Yeah. Most of the liberals are unlikely to listen to all this.
Still wouldn't do it, would it?
No. Anyway, what do you make of the significance of whoever interfered and leaked all these emails, if it's Russia or a whistleblower or whatever? What do you make of that as the rationale for why Hillary Clinton lost the election?
Well, first let me say it is so great to be here today, Paul, here in beautiful downtown Baltimore.
Thank you.
And what do I think of that assertion? I think it's I think that the WikiLeaks emails were way down the list of factors that swung the election. I think that the election can be entirely explained by all the sort of usual things that we go to explain American elections, these broad long-term shifts and things that the candidates said and promises that were made, and it's the after 2 terms of a Democratic presidency. Oh, there's a million things that you can point to. In terms of blunders, if you talk about unforeseen blunders, remember, first back up, the main impact that the WikiLeaks emails had, and they were covered in the American press, was Hillary Clinton's speeches to Goldman Sachs. Remember, that was, I believe, almost the only item from those emails that made it into the press. And it was far overshadowed by Trump's extremely vulgar comments. Remember when he was on the Access Hollywood tape, which came out at almost exactly the same time. So in terms of blunders, I mean, Trump's blunders were so much bigger than Hillary's, and in terms of, as long as we're just talking about mistakes that might have cost the Democrats the election, there's so many other things that you have to mention. Other than that, I mean, the James Comey stuff, where he appeared to reinstate the investigation against Hillary Clinton, which was so shocking. But also, you think of Barack Obama trying to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership passed all the way through the election. That's an incredible blunder, while Hillary's trying to distance herself from it, remember?
Yeah,
and Trump is hitting her for hitting the Democrats for this every day. And here's Obama saying, no, we're going to get it done. We're going to get it done through Congress. That really hurt. And another one, raising Obamacare premiums 2 weeks before Election Day. What were they thinking? Just ask yourself. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember Lyndon Johnson. Would Lyndon Johnson ever have made a move like that? No, it's just like these are beginners' mistakes. Or not beginners, it's because they had such contempt for Trump. They didn't think he had a chance. So Obama could take what was the most explosive issue in the election, trade deals. Trump was hitting the Democrats for trade deals at every speech, all the time, and Obama could just disregard that. That's not a threat. It's not a problem. And here's poor Hillary, remember, trying to backpedal, and get out of this, saying, oh, I've changed my mind about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You know, I used to say it was the gold standard, but now I know different. And Obama just subverting her. It was a terrible blunder. But they don't want to talk about any of that, by the way. You know that, right? Of course, Caesar.
If it was the emails, and if it was Comey, then it doesn't just affect the swing states.
Well,
then she doesn't win the popular vote.
But there's a million, right? But there's also there's a million things that I think the Comey emails were a big factor.
But they should have been a factor everywhere.
Yeah, of course.
She still wins the popular vote.
I mean, it's a kind of rainy day way to talk about. I don't want to say it's silly, but it's a rainy day way to talk about politics, because if you get to take away Hillary's blunders or the terrible things, accidents that happened to her, you get to take away Trump's blunders too. And this man, oh my God. Just go down. Remember all the mistakes this man made on the campaign trail in 2016? Attacking this group, insulting that group, going after the judge. Remember? Going after the beauty contest winner. Oh, my Lord. On and on.
I certainly didn't predict Trump would win. And the morning of the election, if you asked me, I would have said Clinton won. But the first time I said to myself in a serious way, oh, she could lose this, was the night before the election. They were in Philly, and Obama's on stage with her, bragging about all the achievements of the administration. So little sense of the anguish so many people were feeling about their conditions, and all he's doing is bragging about the economic achievements.
Yeah, and that's the sort of motif of the Clinton campaign was complacency. This was a campaign, it was a resume campaign. Hillary ran there was no, what was she offering to? I mean, the great swing electorate of this country, white working class voters. What is she offering these guys? And by the way, everyone knew what was coming. If Trump had a chance, that was the group that he was going to. That's where his chances lay. Was with
and
this
in
group.
the swing states.
So what do you do? What do you do about that? What do you do? What do you offer these guys? Well, there's all sorts of things you could offer them. Hillary doesn't bother. Instead, it's about her qualifications. How she is the most qualified presidential candidate of all time. She's running as a resume candidate. And the sort of unofficial slogan of the Democrats in this last go-around was, America is already great. It's just unbelievable.
Well, that's the whole point, is that she ran in defense of the continuer of the Obama legacy.
Right.
But the Obama legacy saw one of the greatest increases in wealth inequality.
Yeah, inequality is totally rampant, totally out of control. By the way, I was at the Democratic Convention. I went to both party conventions last year. And at the Democratic Convention, you had speakers who tried to make tried to make something of that, the growth in inequality. Elizabeth Warren talked about it. Bernie Sanders talked about it. The problem is they're at the Democratic Convention, and half of the speakers are from the administration, from the Obama administration. You can't really blame this on they were in a terrible spot, because that's sort of what Democrats are very comfortable talking about inequality, but they can't do it when they've been sitting in the White House for 8 years.
Well, I think one of the things you say in your book, and we talked off camera ahead of time, it's not just they made mistakes, and it's not just they don't learn and observe, but they have a vested interest, and they represent a section of the elite. Yes. And maybe they should be better liars, but they're a little closer to what they really think.
That they really and truly don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's. I don't want to be too. I don't want to apply that with too broad a brush, because you and I both know there's plenty of Democrats who do care, and there's a lot of good Democrats out there, and I hope that that we'll see some shift in the Democratic Party. By the way, a lot of Democrats historically that I'm fond of. I like Franklin Roosevelt. I like Harry Truman, Lyndon Johnson. These are good. I mean, these people with terrible flaws, but these are guys who would have known what to do about the current situation, the current economic situation.
We are going to talk a little bit about this later, because each one of these presidents you just mentioned have some pretty horrible things on their record.
Vietnam War, of course.
And dropping nuclear bombs on people.
But the current the faction that is currently in charge of the Democratic Party, this is by and large a very contented group of people. So what the thesis of Listen Liberal, what I write about in Listen Liberal, is how the Democratic Party changed from being a party that really cared about blue-collar workers, working class people, to being a party that cares about a very different group.
Did it actually care? And even Roosevelt, like when he originally ran, he certainly wasn't running on a stimulus plan. He wasn't running on a big jobs program.
Did they genuinely care?
Well, let me just add one point to it. Are they simply more farsighted when it comes to systemic solutions? Like Roosevelt knew that if you want to keep any form of modern democratic capitalism,
yeah, it has to be reformed.
You need to have a jobs program and such, or you're going to be dealing with some kind of fascism in the United States.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's exactly right. But towards the sort of end of the New Deal era, like in the 1960s, labor unions were very powerful within the Democratic Party. Members of Congress often came from a blue-collar background, came up through organized labor. That sort of thing was fairly common in those days. This is not to say that they were ever a perfect party or anything like that, but there has been a real shift, not a cosmetic shift, but a real shift.
Doesn't that actually begin with Truman?
Like with Truman.
Yeah, like Vice President Wallace, Roosevelt's vice president.
Oh, no, you're right. There's
a real
fights.
progressive,
Sure,
and then you have kind of a coup against Wallace.
Yeah.
The unions want Wallace as to become the vice presidential nominee.
Yeah.
And in '45, it's kind of a coup within the party, and they dump Wallace and bring in Truman.
I know, but I considered that that stuff was too far outside of the focus of Listen Liberal. I started in the late 1960s, which is, there was an enormous change in the Democratic Party, a lot of it for the better. This is in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, when the Democratic Party decided to sit down and reform itself. And they basically decided to remove organized labor from its structural position within the Democratic Party. This is the famous McGovern Commission in the early 1970s. Now, some of the things they did were very good and very healthy. And in their defense, I mean, by the way, once they do this, once a party of the left, which is unfortunately what the Democrats are in our system, once a party of the left decides that it's no longer going to be a voice of working class people and instead is going to be a voice of a different group, namely affluent white collar professionals, which is what they deliberately chose in the early 1970s. They chose to make this transition. When that happens, things like the inequality, the situation that we're in today, are inevitable. When that's the left party in your system has decided that they don't really care about the fate of working class people, what we have seen come to pass is inevitable. Now, in their defense, no one in 1971 would have seen that coming. I mean, the America was at its probably most equal state ever, like the high watermark of social equality, or economic equality in this country, where you had very famously back in those days blue-collar people living next door to white-collar people. They have both live in ranch houses in the suburbs or whatever, and the difference would mainly be a matter of taste. Commentators, it's like sociological commentators used to write about this all the time, like this guy drinks Budweiser, this guy drinks martinis, this guy drives a Chevy, this guy drives a Buick, but they earn the same amount. And that's who we were in this country.
The upper stratum of mostly unionized workers were making similar money to some professionals.
White collar, exactly. Yeah.
And that was to a large extent because they were getting kind of bought off with the.
Well, they were paid really well.
Yeah, but they were getting the share of the plunder of the world because they were.
Oh, of course.
Single
That's right. Well, you're talking
world,
about the very large picture. Yes, absolutely, and they have a lot to answer for too. But all I'm getting at here is that this was the case in this country, and that has completely disappeared. And in fact, I'm in my 50s now, but I grew up in that world where, I'm from Kansas City. If you had a parade in Kansas City, organized labor had a float in the parade. If you had a blue ribbon commission to decide some issue, organized labor had a seat at the table. It was just, that's who we were as a society, that working class people were represented. And that's gone. And I describe this to younger people, and they can't, imagine that America was like this. But it was not just that America was like this. This was the cliche of who we were.
And isn't part of what happened in the Democratic Party is that the leadership of many, not all, but many of the big unions, because they're having such a comfortable life, and the leaders of the unions are not living and getting paid like professionals. They're getting paid like CEOs. They're getting...
That's right. CEOs in the 70s.
Yeah.
A very different world now.
but big salaries and $40 steaks at lunch and so on. That they they said okay to the elites. They said okay to Wall Street. You can run the Democratic Party. You just make sure that us big unions kind of get what we need in a very narrow way.
Oh, that's right. I think that might be the case. I mean, some unions were always better than others. United Auto Workers, for example, but they were very angry when this happened to them in the 70s, when they basically lost their power within the Democratic Party. Very upset about it.
Part of the critique of, including the auto workers, is that they had this wonderful health care plan for themselves, but they did next to nothing to lobby for a universal health care plan for the country. Later, they get screwed.
Yes, look, all of these are all true and correct objections, but the larger picture thing is they get removed from their position of strength in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party then becomes, through the 1970s and the 80s, becomes a very different beast and becomes a vehicle for the interests of affluent white-collar professionals. And as we all know, labor still, by and large, endorses Democratic candidates, funds Democratic candidates, and the Democrats have lots of other groups who are part of the coalition as well. We all know that. Minorities, women, the young, on and on and on. Many, many, many groups that vote that are reliably Democratic. But the group that comes first, and the group whose interests always prevail in Democratic circles, is professionals. And by the way, this is not a secret. This is not something that I made up. This is not something where you have to read between the lines. They're open about this. They talk about this all the time. The Democratic Party. You read
in your book, you call this class the meritocracy.
Yeah, that's their philosophy. And that's the philosophy that the Democratic Party has by and large embraced. And you see it in the Hillary Clinton campaign in a sort of a staggering way. Well, you see it in Hillary Clinton's career, where Hillary Clinton, and by the way, and I don't hold this against her, I admire Hillary Clinton in all sorts of ways, but she's like her husband and like Barack Obama, she comes from a humble background and is plucked out of it by a fancy education, by a fancy school. In her case, Wellesley College. In her husband's case, Georgetown. Barack Obama was at Harvard, or was it Columbia? It was Columbia and then Harvard.
Yeah, and he hands up Harvard Law Review. Yeah.
Yes, right. But it's always the same trajectory with these people, where their success in life comes through education and comes through the opportunities that education affords them. And so Hillary goes to Yale Law School. Hillary becomes this super lawyer, sort of, back in Little Rock, and they used to call her whatever it was, the best lawyer west of whatever river Little Rock is west. I don't even remember. It might be the Mississippi. I forget. But that's her career is defined by her academic excellence and her achievement as a professional. And that's really who she cares about, and that's who the Democratic Party cares about. And you can see this, and what I do in Listen Liberal is I point out all the ways that this manifests itself, that this meritocratic worldview that a guy like Barack Obama really embraces at his core, that really is who he is. He really believes that the talented should rule and that the talented can figure everything out.
And then these guys go to the section of billionaires willing to listen to them.
That's right.
And they say to them, we will manage the system for you.
Yeah.
And it will be good for you, and it will be good for us. And we know how to talk to the working class.
Yes.
So we'll make sure they don't become a problem.
Yes, and so what you see in America and basically in the last 20 or 30 years is both parties speak to different segments of the wealthy. The Republicans have the 1%, the people with inherited wealth, the people who are really way up there, Koch brothers, Walton family, that kind of thing. The Democrats speak to the top 10%, your affluent suburban professionals, people with advanced degrees, people who live in the nice suburbs, and but they're, these are people that I live among. I am one of these people.
Well, they got some of the 1%ers. They get some of
them, yes.
They get some of the hedge fund guys, and they get Silicon Valley.
But you have this situation now where it's gone so far that, did you know that Hillary outraised Donald Trump 2-1? In this last go-around? And you look at the really affluent, like the affluent college towns, the affluent suburbs, Hillary won them. Hillary won Orange County. Am I right about that, or did I imagine that in a dream or something?
I'm not sure.
But where Hillary Clinton was beating Donald Trump in all of these sort of corners of American wealth. Donald Trump, the billionaire,
My understanding is Trump had very little billionaire money behind him other than Sheldon Adelson.
A handful of the usual suspects.
It wasn't until, well, in the primaries he had only Sheldon Adelson, and then after the primaries he gets Robert Mercer, who you should watch our documentary about Robert Mercer, the bizarre right-wing billionaire that backed Bannon and Trump, because he played a key role in this. But he didn't have the normal billionaires, including the Koch brothers, that
they
normally
were
back
not excited
Republicans.
about Trump.
Yeah.
So Hillary outraised and outspent Trump 2-1. I remember I went to Florida the week before, actually went to Palm Beach, right down the street from Trump's house. And I was in Palm Beach, Florida, the ultimate swing state, the week before the election. I was writing a story that I assume we'll talk about later, a story for The Guardian about, well, we'll come to this later. But I was, watching TV, of course, watching the news, and it was wall-to-wall Hillary commercials. Hillary TV commercials constantly, no Trump, I didn't see any Trump TV commercials. But then you get in the car and drive out into the countryside, and there's Trump billboards everywhere you go. It was a really interesting moment where Trump basically, in all sorts of ways, kind of flipped the equation on the Democrats and did so well in all of these blue-collar counties and with a lot of these blue-collar voters who really, as I've always said, have no business voting for a guy like that and, are spectacularly ill-served by Republican economic policy.
Okay, in the next segment of our interview, we're going to continue our discussion and dig a little further into what sections of the working class voted for Trump and why. Thomas has written quite a bit about this, including his book. What is it again? What's the matter with Kansas? Well, what's the matter with the American working class? We're going to talk about that in the next segment of Reality Asserts Itself with Thomas Frank on the Real News Network.